and it's about time to be planting gardens and all. Some of you all I know are avid gardeners. I am not. But I know that some of you are, and you see a pretty day like this and it makes you think about getting out there and planting the garden. I was talking to somebody this week and I said, I think that here in Columbia, Tennessee, we're considered frost-free by April the 10th, and that person corrected me and said, I think it's more like April 15th, but we're close on that. And what we're hoping is that this last week's cold spell will be the last one that we have to really worry about, and it's time to be sowing the seed. Get out there and plant the gardens and so forth. We're going to talk tonight in our continuing study about sowing a different kind of seed. We're going to talk about sowing the seed of the kingdom. We're going to talk about sowing the seed, doing the work of teaching the lost, spreading the gospel message. We started this series last week, and for the next few weeks we want to continue talking about sowing the seed. And when we talk about sowing the seed, we're talking about sowing the gospel message in the hearts of lost sinners. We want to try to help people learn the truth that will save their souls in eternity. We're doing this not because it's information that's necessarily new to us. We're doing this with the idea that we want to motivate ourselves to be more active in this very important work of sharing the gospel message. So we'll talk a little bit more about sowing the seed tonight. We stop here just briefly to say thank you for being here. As I said, it's a beautiful day. You can't hardly write a picture, draw up an order, paint a picture of a prettier day than we've had in Middle Tennessee. A beautiful spring day. It's a blessing from God. All of His creation on display in the springtime is amazing. But it's a special blessing for us in that we get to come together as God's family and worship together on the Lord's Day. Thanks for being here tonight to be a part of this worship, and thanks to those who are visiting with us. Tonight, what we want to do as we continue our study is that we sort of want to paint a portrait of what would be a successful personal worker, a successful sower. So, you and I should want to be the best that we can be in doing this work. If we're going to do this job and we're going to do it well, there are several things that need to be true of us, okay? And so that's what we mean by sort of painting a portrait or getting a good picture in mind of the kind of person we need to be in order to be successful in sharing the gospel message. The first thing that I would put on this list is that you and I need to be personally devoted and faithful. We're not going to have a good result in trying to influence others if we're not living this life ourselves. Why would someone want to listen to us about being a Christian, serving God, when they know that we ourselves are not doing that very well? And so I think a very first prerequisite, if you're going to share the message with others, is you've got to be living it yourself, and it needs to be obvious that you are. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 15, be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world. Notice way back then in the first century, Paul described their situation, society, as a crooked and perverse nation. Well, that certainly seems applicable to our day and time also, doesn't it? We live in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation. What do you do when you live in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation or nation? You shine as lights in the world. Set a right example. Be illustrating what serving God is all about. Let people see you. The idea of shining, in other words, it needs to be something that's on display. It needs to show. You're a Christian. You believe the Bible. You serve God. You're a disciple of Jesus Christ. Let that shine. Show that to be true in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation. In the text that Ben read for us earlier from 1 Peter chapter 2, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Notice, that they may see your good deeds. Again, it has to be obvious. We have to be displaying it. It has to be. Now, we're not doing our good deeds to be praised of men, but we need to be doing our good deeds in such a fashion that it's obvious that we are devoted and committed to the Lord. Notice what the result could be is that they themselves will glorify God on the day of visitation. That suggests that they would be converted. That's a real challenge, because in this text he says they want to talk about you as evildoers. They'd like to say something bad about you, but you live in such a way that even those who want to say something bad about you aren't able to do so. They'll see your good deeds. They will glorify God on the day of visitation. So again, I think this is a reasonable starting point when we're trying to figure out what needs to be true of us to be successful in this important job, personally devoted and faithful. We need to be absolutely convinced that those who have not obeyed the gospel are lost. There are some people, and I'm sure you are familiar with the fact that some people have this idea of universalism, that everybody's going to be saved in the end anyway. Well, if you thought that, then why would you bother yourself to try and talk to anybody about the gospel? If you believed the universalist position that everybody's going to be saved anyway, nobody's going to be punished, there wouldn't be any reason to talk to anyone. Other people hold out for sort of a special status of certain people, that maybe a special pardon will be extended to at least some unbelievers. Not everybody's going to be lost, and not everybody, even people who don't obey the gospel, they won't necessarily be lost. God will potentially save people who've never responded to the gospel call. Again, if you believe that, then you wouldn't be very strongly motivated to go out there and teach others. We've got to be convinced. We've got to be absolutely convinced. These people that we know, our family members who are not Christians, our neighbors, friends we have in the community, co-workers on the job, if they have not obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, they are lost in sin and destined to an eternal destruction if we don't get the message to them. When we see these people that we associate with on a regular basis, we need to recognize them as lost people and therefore be motivated to try and change that outcome for them. We've got to be absolutely convinced. You can't say, I've known this guy for 20 years. He's a good old boy. I suspect he'll be all right. He never goes to church. He never reads his Bible. He never obeyed the gospel. But he's just a fine person, and I'm not too worried about him. If that's your thinking, then you will not be motivated to reach out to that guy. But if, on the other hand, you say, he is a good guy, and I've known him for a long time, and I want to see him be saved eternally, because if he doesn't do it, if he doesn't obey the gospel, he will be lost. You've got to be absolutely convinced of that, that those who do not obey the gospel will be lost. In Luke 19, at verse 10, the Son of Man, Jesus said, the Son of Man, He came to seek and save that which was lost. But if lost people can be saved without the gospel message, then Jesus came for nothing, didn't He? He came to seek and save the lost, but if you don't have to obey the gospel anyway, if you don't have to believe in Jesus and do the will of God, then Jesus really died for nothing. In Acts chapter 17, verse 16, while Paul waited for them in Athens, his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. We've talked about this recently. Notice, his spirit was stirred in him. Why was Paul so worked up? Well, here he was in this pagan city of Athens, and he realized that the whole citizenry was given over to this idolatrous worship. They were lost. It troubled him. It stirred his spirit within him, and he was determined to try to reach out to them. When he spoke to the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, verse 31, he said, "Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I cease not to warn everyone night and day with tears." Paul really was convinced that people who didn't obey God and were not being faithful to Him would be lost. He was absolutely convinced of it, and it motivated him. It clearly motivated him to be busy in the gospel work. And that needs to be true of us. So we ourselves are personally devoted and faithful, and we are absolutely convinced if we don't get this message out here to these people, even good friends, family, co-workers and neighbors, they're lost. We've got to see that. We've got to believe that and really be convinced of it. That's a necessary characteristic that we must possess. We need to be equipped with a practical knowledge of the Bible. If we're going to help people in this very important matter of knowing God's truth and obeying it, obviously we have to know it well. We have to have a practical knowledge of it ourselves, because you can't teach what you don't know yourself. Let's say you have trouble with your car. Maybe you've got transmission problems, and so you're going to take your car someplace to get them to work on the transmission, but the person that you take your car to doesn't know the first thing about a car transmission. Well, what kind of help is he going to be to you? You got transmission trouble, but that guy doesn't know anything about transmission. He's not going to be any help to me, right? Same thing's true here. Lost people need to know what the Bible teaches. But we're no help to them if we ourselves don't know what the Bible teaches. Notice why the Bible was written. In John chapter 20, verse 30, especially the New Testament and the information about Jesus specifically, John 20, verse 30, many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. What was written was for the purpose of causing people to believe that Jesus is the Christ, and by virtue of that believing, they could have life through his name. That's why the New Testament was written, John says. We need to be able to use that information then to provoke that result, right? We need to know this information, know it well enough that we can share with other people to convince them Jesus is the Christ, and convince them to have obedient faith, believing and have life through his name. In Acts chapter 2, verse 37, when Peter had preached on the day of Pentecost, notice the result he was able to provoke. When they heard this, they were pricked in their heart and said to Peter and the rest of the apostles, "Men and brethren, what shall we do?" Peter's message convicted them of the sin that was in their life. We've got to know the Bible well enough that we can convict the sinner of the sin in his life. So again, all of that and a whole lot more, we could say, if you're going to be a successful sower of the seed, a successful personal worker, you got to know your Bible well. We're going to probably talk about this several more times in the course of this series of lessons, trying to motivate ourselves. But I think one of the things that holds a lot of people back is they say, "Well, I just don't feel like I know enough." Okay, and we've said this before, and I'm convinced we'll say it again. If your evaluation of yourself is true and you don't really know enough, okay, we'll accept that evaluation now. Are we to accept that same excuse a year from now? 5 years from now? Are you still going to be saying, "I just don't feel like I know enough"? That won't work, will it? And so get busy. If you don't feel like you have this good practical knowledge of the Bible, get busy acquiring it. It's not rocket science, as they say. You can learn it, and you can be able to share it with others. We need to be willing to deny self. I would argue that another great hindrance to doing personal work is that we are just selfish individuals. I've got my personal interests. I got my recreational interests. I have my easy chair, and I just like to sit up in my easy chair, and I don't like to be bothered, you know. So if I'm going to do this work, it's going to require some time and effort on my part. I'm just not sure I want to do that. I value my own leisure time too much. Well, that's not denying self, is it? That's not a willingness to deny myself. Maybe I have to put aside for a time my personal interest, my recreational interest, my resting time interest in order to do this very important work. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, Jesus said to his disciples, "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Take up the cross. Follow Jesus. That's the whole idea of making personal sacrifice. And you know what some of this sacrifice might be, this willingness to deny self? it might be that I just don't want to suffer maybe the embarrassment. Maybe my problem is personal pride. And I don't want somebody to put me down or ridicule me. You know, if I get out there and try to teach people that they should obey the gospel message, they may brand me as a religious fanatic. You are just a fanatic. I don't want to be called a fanatic. I don't want that sort of. I don't want to have to suffer that sort of ridicule. It's humiliating to me when people belittle me like that, and I just don't want to suffer that. What am I saying? When I say all of that, what am I saying? I'm saying I'm not willing to deny myself. Even my own personal pride is keeping me from getting out there and doing the work that needs to be done. We need to be willing to deny self. We got to be steadfast in this work. And what I mean by that is just a word here or a word there will likely not be enough. We got to keep on keeping on. We got to keep pressing the matter. And that's in general, we need to keep pressing the matter. And with specific individuals, we need to keep pressing the matter. And so you have this friend, and you spoke to him once about the importance of being a Christian. But then you never brought it up again. Well, he didn't think it was all that important to you because he only mentioned it once, you know. But if on the other hand, every time you had a good opportunity, I'm not saying you have to say this every word to him has to be about being a Christian. But if it was the case that you frequently talked about this, that often you brought this up as a very important thing, then he began to see that, hey, he thinks this is important. Maybe I should investigate. And so we got to be continuous in the effort, steadfast, not just a word here or there, but a real effort. And when we fail, get up and try again. In Galatians 6 verse 9 it says, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. We can't faint. We need to faint not. In other words, the idea is just don't get tired and give up. Don't be weary. Be not weary in well-doing. Keep on keeping on. We need to, in this parable of the sower, the idea of sowing seed is kind of interesting. I want to look at the parable in a minute, but first of all, look at what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 11 verse 6. And I think this is very applicable to what we're talking about here. In Ecclesiastes 11 verse 6, Solomon said, in the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thine hand. For thou knowest not whether it shall prosper, either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. Don't spare the seed. Get out there, be busy. You don't know whether this or that will be successful. Maybe both efforts will be successful, but you just keep sowing the seed. And that's one of the points that we've made about the parable of the sower before. Here are the words that we looked at more specifically last week, and this is what we're basing our series on, the parable of the sower. But notice how this sower, he was going to sow the seed anywhere, everywhere. In places where it was likely to grow, in places where it wasn't likely to grow, he was busy sowing the seed. Luke 8 verse 5, a sower went out to sow his seed. As he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trodden down, and the fowls of the air devoured it. And some fell upon a rock, and as soon as it was sprung up, it withered away because it lacked moisture. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up with it and choked it. And other fell on good ground, and sprang up and bare fruit 100-fold. And when he had said these things, he cried, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. And the parable is, and he goes on to explain, he's talking about sowing the seed of the kingdom, right? But in all of that, did you notice that 3 out of the 4 areas wherein the sower was sowing his seed, 3 out of the 4 were not probably likely to do much good, but he sowed anyway. And that's the way we need to be, just busy doing the work, sowing it where it might grow and sowing it where maybe it might not. We don't know, and we shouldn't even try to prejudge that. Just be steadfastly out there doing the work of spreading the gospel and sharing the news about salvation. I'd like to suggest to you that we need to be enthusiastic about this work. Let me see if I could describe a scenario here. Okay. Well, we got a gospel meeting coming up. The people over there at church have printed some flyers. and they're getting together Saturday for a couple hours. They want to go knocking on doors in some of the neighborhoods near the church. But oh man, I do not like to do that. I just almost rather take a beating than have to do that. But they said, come at 10 o'clock Saturday morning, and we're going to, oh man, I just got to go, I guess. I really, really don't want to go. But I just have to. I'm going to go. So I get my handful of flyers, and I'm going down the street, and I'm knocking on a couple of doors, and I'm knocking pretty lightly, because I'm hoping they won't even hear me knocking at the door. I can just stick this flyer, in the storm door and get out of there before someone comes, because I don't really even want to talk to anybody. So I get on this, and I get to this one porch, and I knock on the door lightly. And man, I hadn't hardly even touched the door. The door flew open. And here's this guy standing there. He's got an open can of beer in one hand and a smoking cigar in the other hand. And he says, "What do you want?" We're having a gospel meeting over at the Church of Christ. I don't guess you'd be interested in coming. He said, "No!" And he slams the door in my face. I just completely wasted the whole time, right? I mean, I might as well stayed home, right? If I'm not going to show any more enthusiasm and excitement than that about sharing the gospel message. Here's a guy who, by all appearances, really needed what we're trying to offer. But I didn't display any enthusiasm in sharing that with him. We've got to be enthusiastic about what we have. We've got the best thing that the world desperately needs. We've got the message of salvation. We've got to be excited about sharing it with people. Now, I'm including myself in this category. I need to get my enthusiasm level up too. We need to be excited about the chances to share this news with others. Have you seen this point before? I think you have. And it may be a little bit of a stretch, but the point has been made. Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. In Acts chapter 8, verse 29, then the Spirit said to Philip, "Go near and join thyself to this chariot." And Philip ran thither to him and heard him read the prophet Isaiah and said, "Understandest thou what thou readest?" Someone has suggested if it had been one of us, we'd have gone trudging over there. The chariot would have probably got past us, and we would never caught up with him before he was gone from sight, because we just dragging along. We don't want to go anyway. Philip ran to the chariot. And again, it may be straining at a point a little bit, but it suggests that he was enthusiastic to do what he was assigned to do. And we need to be that way also. We need to be enthusiastic about sharing the gospel message. We need to be people who give into prayer. We ought to do that all the time about all kinds of things. But this is an area where we should engage prayer about this important work that we have to do. We want to be, again, what we really want to be is we want to be successful in sharing the gospel message. And one thing that can really help us do that is if we use the powerful tool of prayer. In James chapter 1, verse 5, James says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." Do you feel like you lack wisdom in regards to sharing the gospel message with specific people that you know? Someone says, "Well, I've got this family member, and they're not a Christian, but I just don't know how to approach him. I really love him. He's a great person, but I just feel like I don't have a good idea about how to approach him with the gospel message." You know what I ought to do about that? If that is the situation, I ought to pray. I ought to ask God for wisdom in regards to that specific case and that specific person. Pray to God for wisdom in approaching that individual. We're going to talk more as we get into our study about the fact that each of us should probably have possibly even a written down list of prospects of people that we would like to try to reach with the gospel. And so this guy is on your list. He's a guy that you really want to take the message to him. You want to sow the seed in his heart. but you're not sure you know how to do that. You just wonder what would be the best approach to use. Pray about that. That's what wisdom is. Pray. If you feel you lack the wisdom, pray about that. It will be a big help. We should be people given to prayer, and in this case, specifically prayer about sowing the seed of the kingdom. And then, finally tonight, let me suggest to you that if we're going to be successful at this work, our motivator has to be that we love lost souls. We love people. We want to see them be saved. We don't want them to be lost. We need to be motivated out of love. In Mark chapter 6, verse 34, notice about our Savior Jesus Christ, the one that we are to imitate. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. What motivated Jesus? It says he had compassion on them. They were like sheep without a shepherd. They were lost people. He could see their situation, their spiritual need. And then he began to teach them many things. So Jesus was motivated out of love. And of course, that's an obvious thing, right? That's not any earth-shattering news. But we understand Jesus was motivated by love. It's what made him do what he did. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, speak the truth in love, growing up to him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. Speaking the truth in love. What drives us on? What motivates us? What keeps us working? Love. We need to love the souls of men. I think I could speak for everybody who's here tonight that if your neighbor, if your direct neighbor had some terrible calamity befall them, you would do what you could to help them. It's the kind of people you are. It's the kind of people we want to be. We want to be people who are really helpful to those, fulfilling the needs of people around us best as we can. And that's a wonderful thing. That's love, right? That's loving your neighbor. We should do all those kind of things, but the most important thing that we can do for them out of love is to share with them the gospel message. They don't know, they don't realize that yet maybe, but if you were able to teach them and convert them, it would be the single greatest thing that anybody will ever do for them in their entire life. And so we need to have that love. We need to be motivated by that love. It ought to lead us to work hard in this special service. And so, a lot of it has to do with our attitude, doesn't it? We want to be successful. And if we're going to be successful in the work, the kind of things that we've described tonight are absolutely necessary. So, I mean, if we would prepare ourselves for any other important endeavor, we need to prepare ourselves, get our act together, so to speak, to do this very important work in sharing the gospel message. Thanks for listening. I hope that you will join with me as we study these things in prayer about this specifically. It's so important, and I think maybe sometimes we don't meditate on it and think about it as much as we should. So let's really concentrate your thinking on this and see if we can do better and work harder in the field of personal work, personal evangelism. Thanks for listening. We're going to sing a song of invitation. If you need our help tonight in getting your life right with God, either in obeying the gospel if you're not yet a Christian, or in being restored if you've fallen away. If there's anything we can do to help, let us know while we stand and sing.
Hear the blessed Savior calling thee a prayer.